1 Kings chapter 15 tonight. 1 Kings chapter 15, continuing through the book of 1 Kings. And I was just thinking about something earlier today. Years ago, I did a study on genealogies. And I've talked about this before, where I went through and I made a Bible family tree with the family tree software. And in doing that, I learned a lot about different characters in the Bible. I made a lot of connections that have really helped me throughout the years. But one area where I always struggled, and we're going to start getting into some of that pretty soon, is a lot of the names are the same. Sometimes too, you have one king in Judah and then a different king in Israel, and they have the same name. And it would get very confusing, and so it's real easy to kind of get lost in all these characters because we're getting into lesser known characters, but they're still important. And these characters, as we get later into them, if you don't know them real well, if you don't know their stories real well, you're also going to get lost when you get into the major and minor prophets, because at the beginning of those prophecies, it'll often say during the reign of Ahaz and Jotham or something like that. And if that doesn't, bring you to a place, if it's not connecting you to certain stories, you're going to miss a lot of stuff in those prophecies. But it's hard. These are tough names. How many Jehorims have you met in your life? You've not met too many people like that. And so what I remember back when I was doing that, I was like, I wish to help me remember these people too. I'm kind of a visual learner. I thought, I wish I had pictures of these people. And I was like, somebody needs to just create pictures for every Bible character so we can have an image in our mind to help us distinguish between the Jehorims and the Jeroboams, because there's going to be two different Jeroboams. So, and I was thinking about it today. It's like, what? AI. We've got AI. Maybe that's what we need to do. And at least it would help me just kind of sort these people out. So I hope it doesn't get too confusing as we start going into this. I hope I say names right. If I'm preaching and I contradict myself saying a name wrong, okay, I just messed up. Okay, it's easy to get messed up on some of these names, but hopefully we're going to follow along, keep track of who these people are in our minds. And so remember, the kingdom is divided: Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. And it says in verse 1, now in the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, reigned Abijam over Judah. Okay, and so notice we have this new character, Abijam. And one of the things too about these names, Abijam is not a name that you hear a whole lot. He's not a well-known king. Obviously, everybody knows David. Everybody knows Solomon. Rehoboam is pretty well known. It's a unique name. It's a very specific story where you see the splitting of the kingdoms. But Abijam, not a real common name. And now he's not to be confused with Ahijah, because also if you look at the account of Abijam in Chronicles, he's referred to as Abijah, which is another thing that makes it confusing. Sometimes these guys' names are spelled and even pronounced different in these different books, just adding kind of another level of confusion. So here in 1 Kings, he is referred to as Abijam. But in my mind, he's Abijah. Okay, so if you hear me talking about Abijah tonight, I'm talking about Abijam. Not to be confused with Ahijah, the priest. Okay? And Ahijah, the priest, is not a real well-known priest. So when you're listening, it's going to be real easy for you to get lost on who I'm talking about. But it's important that we remember all these characters. It's important that we pay attention to these things. It will really help us as we go through these stories in the Bible. And so Abijam, or Abijah here, he's going to be the king. He is the king of the southern kingdom. Direct descendant of David. You have David, Solomon, Rehoboam, and then we have Abijah. So verse 2, 3 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. Now, I want to take time as we go through some of these passages too. We're going to see a couple examples of this as we go through the Kings. But right here is one example where we're going to see some things that are very confusing in the genealogies. And I remember as I was putting this family tree together, I got to this point and I'm like, wait a minute. Something's wrong. And as I'm studying the Bible and I'm trying to figure all this out, I found what looked like to be a contradiction. Okay? And I'm going to show you in a minute. It looks like a major contradiction. And I remember, one of the things that I had back then, and I still have it. I have this hard drive, and I had this file that I saved on there in what I called the Forbidden Archives. That's another story for another day. But and some of you have heard about the Forbidden Archives, but I had these notes in there. One of the things I had in the Forbidden Archives was like Bible studies I was doing on end times, because I was almost like afraid of the fact that I'm like studying these things that sounded post-trib. That was one of the things I had in the Forbidden Archives, was my notes on end times. But another thing I had on there too were things I found in the Bible that appeared to be contradictions. And I don't believe there are contradictions in the Bible. But there have been things in the past that I have ran into this, like, I can't reconcile this. Now, what you do when you come across something like that, you know what you do? You save it in the Forbidden Archives, and you move on, and you keep studying, and pray the Lord reveals it to you later what's going on. Okay? Now, I do believe I have a solution to this. I'm going to show you what it is tonight. And what I'm going to at least prove to you tonight is that it's not a contradiction. You cannot declare what I'm going to show you a contradiction, because even though the Bible does not tell us exactly what's going on, there is a major possibility that is very likely, and I'll show you that. So it definitely cannot be called a contradiction, just something that maybe is a little bit confusing for us. So I want you to notice that name Maacah and that name Abishalom. Remember those names, okay? Because one thing we don't want to do too, and this is why we often think there's contradictions in the Bible, is because we apply our modern 21st century American way of accounting for things to the Scriptures. And listen, the Bible does not change with our culture. We need to understand that. That's why people get confused in the 430 years in Egypt. Often they apply a modern way of thinking and accounting for things to the Scriptures. No, the Bible means what it says, and it says what it means. And it means the same thing that it said when it was originally written. And just because we've changed in our culture and the way we speak of things, the Bible's not going to change with us. So what we've got to do is we've got to get back to more of a biblical way of thinking, a biblical way of talking. And if we do that, we'll find out, hey, there's not a contradiction here. We are just misunderstanding what they were talking about, because maybe we have different ways of looking at things now. So remember that name, Maacah and Abishalom. And she is the mother of Abijah. Remember her. Verse 3, and he walked in the sins of his father, talking about Abijah, which he had done before him, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. Nevertheless, for David's sake, did the Lord his God give him a lamp in Jerusalem, to set up his son after him, and to establish Jerusalem. Because David did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, and turned not aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, save only in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. And so we need to always keep this in mind as we see all the horrible sins committed by these kings. God didn't preserve them for the sake of these individuals, but he did for David's sake. The sins that men like Abijah did, and some of the ones we're going to see later that are in David's line, the things that they did should have ended them. But they were still preserved. You know why? Because of David. Now, I think there's a picture of something right there. Because have you ever wondered why Christians don't lose their salvation after all the sins that we have done? You know why? For Jesus' sake. It's for Jesus' sake. And I think that's a great picture of it there. We are preserved because of Christ. That's why people can't lose their salvation. We are not saved because of what we did. We are saved because of what Jesus did. And we are not preserved because of anything we do or anything special about us. We are preserved for Christ's sake. And that's the only reason this line continued. It was for David's sake, because of a promise that he made to David. And I'm not preaching on eternal security tonight, but I feel like it right now, just because, again, this is just one more. I mean, pictures don't prove anything, okay? We've already got plenty of proof, but this is a great picture that I think that we, as we look through these kings. So verse 3, or I already read verses 3 through 5. Verse 6, and there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. Now the rest of the acts of Abijam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam. And Abijam slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa his son reigned in his stead. So we really know very little about Abijah from 1 Kings, except for the fact he was like Rehoboam, he was wicked, he was king for 3 years, we know who his mom was. But we're not going to take time to go through it. But if you go through 1 Chronicles and you look at the story of Abijah, in chapter 13, you will read a great story with him about a victory that he won when he was fighting against Israel. And there was a situation there where he called on the Lord, and the Lord came through for him, and God won a victory with Abijah. So even though overall he was wicked, and we see that a lot with the kings, when those kings would humble themselves, God would respond to it. And again, the mercy that he showed the kings on both sides, in Judah and Israel, was just amazing. That's why you know what? Never just assume God's not going to help you out if you'll call on him. No matter how much you mess up, never underestimate God's mercy. Just, confess your sin and hope for the best. God often comes through for people, and God did for Abijah in 1 Chronicles 13. So, interestingly enough, what you see in 1 and 2 Kings as we're going through this, it does seem to me that there is more of a focus on the northern kingdom. It talks about what's going on in the southern kingdom, but it doesn't give as many of the stories. Most of the stories are kind of centered around what took place in the northern kingdom as we go through as we go through 1 and 2 Kings. And so we see many references to the southern kingdom because there was a lot going on between the two groups. When you go into Chronicles, it's more of a focus on the southern kingdom, even though we're seeing constant references to what was going on in the northern kingdom because of all the interacting between the kingdoms. And so that's just kind of something to keep in mind. But now let's read a little bit more, and let's start getting confused a little bit, and then see if we can reconcile this. So verse 9 says, "And in the 20th year of Jeroboam king of Israel reigned Asa over Judah. And 41 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom." Now, can anybody think of a problem right there? How is his mom and how does Asa and Abijah have the same mom? No, because Asa was the son of Abijah. So how does that work? Now, this is when I was having a problem doing my family tree. I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, is this I hope it's not what I'm thinking, but I remember this is really weird because that's really messed up. If that was his mother/grandmother, that's a really weird situation. Is that what's going on? So let's read a little bit more. It says, "And Asa did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did David his father. And he took away the Sodomites out of the land," amen, "and removed all the idols that his fathers had made." And we always love seeing that part right there. "And also Maacah, his mother, even her he removed from being queen, because she made an idol in a grove, and Asa destroyed her idol and burned it by the brook Kidron." So obviously his mother was a very wicked woman, so maybe this was a really weird situation. I mean, Abijah was really bad. Maacah was really bad. She made an idol. Maybe there was something really messed up here. What's going on? Well, let's look at what it says in 2 Chronicles. In 2 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 20, and after her, he took Maacah, hopefully I'm saying her name right, the daughter of Absalom. So Abishalom and Absalom are the same person. So that's another thing. Again, sometimes the names are pronounced different. So Abishalom is Absalom, which is, we all know who Absalom is, David's son, which bare him Abijah and Attai and Ziza and Shelomith. So Rehoboam loved Maacah, the daughter of Absalom, above all his wives and his concubines, for he took 18 wives and 80 concubines, and begat 28 sons and 80 daughters. And Rehoboam made Abijah, the son of Maacah, the chief, to be ruler among his brethren, for he thought to make him king. And he dealt wisely and dispersed of all his children throughout all the countries of Judah and Benjamin unto every fenced city. And he gave them victual in abundance, and he desired many wives. So it is very clear that Maacah is Abijah's mother. We see that Rehoboam had many wives, but she was his favorite. And so he decided Abijah is going to be the one who's going to be king, because then that's going to be good for that particular wife. She's going to be taken care of. She's going to be treated the best. So, again, this is really weird. If she's Asa's mom and Abijah is Asa's son, this is really weird. Not brother, but son. Because that's one thing I was like, are we sure they weren't brothers? And I looked, but no, she bore Asa, or she bore Abijah to Rehoboam. Okay, so now let's get really confusing. 2 Chronicles chapter 13. 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 1. It says, now in the 18th year of King Jeroboam began Abijah to reign over Judah. He reigned 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name also was Micaiah, okay, which that could be the same. All right, I mean, Abishalom, Absalom, Maacah, Micaiah, however you say that. But it says, the daughter of Uriel of Gibeah. And there was war between Abijah and Jeroboam. So now we've got for Abijah has a different mom. Now it's the daughter of Uriel of Gibeah. That can't be Absalom. Okay? Absalom and Abishalom you can see. But Uriel of Gibeah? That can't be Absalom. So what's going on here? So it's like, okay, you feel a little better, so it's like, okay, wait a minute. But so it's not the same mom, I guess. But at the same time, how does that work? Because the Bible is very specific about Rehoboam favoring Maacah above his other wives, and her being the mother of Abijah. And then we see Asa removes his mother, Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. So what's going on? Is this a contradiction here? What is happening? What is going on? So here's an explanation. And the Bible does not tell us that this is the case. But this is a very likely possibility. And so as a result of that, we can't just say this is a contradiction. So let me ask you a question. Okay, can anybody tell me who was the mother of Obed, the father of Jesse, the father of David? Anybody know who that was? Well, that would be in Ruth 4:13. Notice it says, so Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife, and when he went in unto her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. And so if you look down at verse 17, mentions they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So you say Ruth. Ruth is the mother of Obed. Okay, well, Ruth is the one who gave birth to Obed. But if you'll notice what it says in verse 14, says, and the woman said unto Naomi, blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. And Naomi took the child, and laid it in her bosom, became a nurse unto it. And the women, her neighbors, gave it name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed, he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. That is something that we see in the Bible where often women would give birth, but another woman would, they would do it for another woman. And she would be the mother. And so I think it is very likely that Maacah was not the biological mother of Abijah or Asa. I personally think that both of them were probably just children that were born to her. That's just my personal opinion, and that is very possible. She would have been the legal mother, because she was the favorite wife of Rehoboam. And isn't it interesting too? Okay, Hannah, she was the favorite wife of her husband. And she wasn't able to have any children. So I don't know if maybe husbands liked them better because they were keeping their figure better or something. I don't know if that's what it was. And so as a result, they still wanted children though. And so they would just have a child by somebody else. We see that in the Bible. And so that's very possible that happened. I don't know. But there's plenty of precedent for this. For example, how about Moses? Moses was considered the son of Pharaoh's daughter. She was his son, legally speaking, even though she did not give birth to him, even though she was not the biological mother. How about Sarah and Ishmael? In Genesis 16:1, it says, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai." So when Ishmael was born, he was actually supposed to be a son to Sarah, but she didn't ever seem to take to him, one of them, Hagar, and then, of course, God ended up giving her her own child. But we see in Genesis 30, verse 3, this is Rachel speaking, "And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon thy knees, that I may also have children by her." So that was a thing that they did in the Bible, where often they would have surrogates, not like today, where people will actually put, a conceived child in someone else's womb. They didn't have that ability. But their husband would actually have a child with somebody else, but the child would be born to them. You say, I don't like that. I don't either. I think that's really weird, but that's what they did back then. They owned people back then. They could kind of do with them what they wanted. It was not a good practice. I don't even think that God was for it. It's one of those things that God permitted. God allowed it. He didn't necessarily stop it in a lot of these situations, but it was something that they did back then. So when I look at the story of Abijah and Asa, I think when it came to their mom, I don't think either of them were biological children of her. I think that they were probably just she wanted to be the main act. She wanted to be the queen. She probably wasn't able to have children, so she told Rehoboam, "Hey, you go have a child by one of the concubines, and that's mine." She wanted that child, so that one would be the king, and then she could be the queen. She could kind of be the main act. And then after Abijah, grows up, she's continuing to be the queen. And then when Asa comes along, and Asa is the one that's finally like, you know what, we're getting rid of her. He does the right thing and removed her. So I think it was just kind of a way that she controlled. But I don't know, the Bible doesn't say a whole lot. But because we have a very reasonable and possible explanation, you can't just declare that a contradiction. It just is one of those things where that was a very common thing that they did back then. And so today, in our modern times, we focus way more on biological parents than legal parents. But understand, legal parents always had in the Bible, and they even do today, if they adopt, all the legal rights and privileges of biological parents. And that's why, too, I've seen people before. You remember back when everybody was became the qualifications police? And, if people didn't have 2 kids, remember when the papal decree went out, if you don't have 2 kids, you're not qualified? Because they said having children, that's all it says in the Bible, not having children in subjection with all gravity, for a man to know how to rule his own house. But that papal decree went out, that, and I'm obviously speaking sarcastically, that you had to have at least 2 children. Everybody's counting everybody's kids. And then you had people that were even saying they had to be biological because it has to be his children. They are his children if they adopt them. Adoption is real parenting. And if somebody adopts children and they are raising those children, they are their parents. They are their mother. They are their father. And if they have those children in subjection with all gravity, they are qualified. And you can have all the legal or all the biological children you want, and if they're not in subjection with all gravity, you're not qualified. And where are those police at? Okay? But at the same time, I just say all that to say that's how we think today. It's more about biology. But no, it's back then. They treated adopted children. They were legally your children. And that's why, too, you could even have children for your brother, basically. If your brother died and he didn't have any seed, you could have a child. And even though it was not a direct descendant of his, physically speaking, that inheritance that he had, it would go to him and it would remain in his name. His name would continue. And back then, they cared very, very much about their name continuing and going forward. They thought different than we do back then. They were always thinking about the future. In fact, Absalom, he never had any sons. He never had any sons. And the Bible tells us that he went and he put up a pillar in the king's dale. Why? So he would be remembered. Now, there is a place today that is referred to as Absalom's pillar, that is in that area, in the king's dale, over there in Jerusalem. Most people think that if it did have anything to do with Absalom, what you're seeing there today was something that they changed greatly because it dates, several hundred years after Absalom. But the Bible refers to a pillar that he put up. Why? Because he wanted his name to be remembered because he didn't have any sons. And so, again, we don't think that way. We don't operate that way today, but that is exactly how they operated back then. That stuff mattered, so it really doesn't matter. Maacah, she could have been the mother of Abijah, and she could have been the mother of Asa, and nothing weird or pervy went on, because it was probably more of a legal thing, more of an adoption thing, more of a surrogate mother thing. That was a common practice back then. So back to Asa. He's considered a good king. Asa did a lot of good things, but there were areas where he fell short. Now, this did not make him a horrible person, but it did cause great problems for the nation. And so verse 14 says, "But the high places were not removed. Nevertheless, Asa's heart was perfect with the Lord all his days." So he did a lot, and the Bible talks about that a lot because, with all these people like David, you see him making really big mistakes, but notice that, his heart was in the right place. And it's like, to me, some of David's sins seem worse than Saul's sins. But the thing is, Saul, he seems, the Bible makes him out to be worse because Saul's heart was not right, where David's heart was right. And a lot of times it's real easy for us to make excuses for ourselves because look at all the problems these guys had. But we've got a special indwelling of the Holy Spirit in a way they didn't have back then. So I don't think we ought to use that as an excuse. And God did overlook a lot of things if their hearts were in the right place. And Asa not removing those high places, it was wrong. He should have done it. However, his heart, it was just something he overlooked. And we need to remember that too. A lot of times we'll look back at some of the preachers in the past, some of the great men, and we'll see areas where they had flaws. Often we do. We look back at some of these preachers that we revere from the past. It's like, how could those guys have been pre-trib? Hey, they were still great men of God, but their hearts were probably perfect with the Lord, but there were some things they overlooked. There were guys like John R. Rice. He wasn't King James only. How is it even possible he was saved? You know what? He had a perfect heart with the Lord, but at the same time, there were things he overlooked. There was things he missed. You know why? Because nobody's perfect. And so we do. With any of the greats in the past, you can find areas where it's like, yeah, that wasn't as it should have been. But yet God used them in a great way because I think their hearts were right and there were some things they overlooked. Maybe God never dealt with them on that. And there's a big difference between that person and somebody who's actively rebelling against God. And listen, we are responsible for the light that we are given. And I'm fine with cutting people from the previous generation some slack on the King James issue when they had not seen the fruit yet of all the modern perversions. They had not seen the fruit yet. They originally thought, hey, they're just trying to update the language to help things out. That was what they thought, but you know what? Time has told us that was a big mistake. And we've now seen the fruit of these things, and I believe now, if I were to turn away from the King James Bible, I believe if I were to just take John R. Rice's position, exactly that he had, I would be in rebellion, and I think God would be upset with me. if I did that, and I would probably get my ministry. And it's like, well, it's the same as John R. Rice. Yeah, but you know better. You were taught right. And I do. There's a lot of stuff we can look back at some of these older preachers from the previous generations where I think their hearts were in the right place. God used them anyway. And you know what? Thank God, we've been shown the truth on these things. If we were to do that exact same thing, we would be in full-blown rebellion, and God would deal with us a lot harsher. So, yeah, sometimes things get overlooked. And one of these days, the next generation, they're probably going to look back at us and see areas where we lacked and see areas where we got things wrong and be like, how are those people even saved? And there's going to be some punk. One of these days when I'm dead and in the grave, Tommy McMurtry's roasting in hell right now. You know, and why? Because, I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know what it's going to be, but there's going to be something that, we probably got wrong. And it's like, he that is of God heareth God's words. How is he even saved? And it's like, but everybody believed that back in those days, and there'll be a big fight about it during that time. People don't really change. Okay. It's just all these things get repackaged. That'll probably happen. But anyway, verse 15, and he brought in all the things which his father had dedicated and the things which himself had dedicated unto the house of the Lord, silver and golden vessels. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. Now, something can be confusing too. The chronology of these books are very confusing because it's been just basically giving us a summary of Abijah and Asa's story. And so Asa has been having all kinds of problems with Baasha, king of Israel. Now, Baasha was actually the third king in the northern kingdom. Because a little bit later in the chapter, we're actually going to go back in time a little bit because there was a king before Baasha. There was Nadab that was before him. But what's going to happen later in the chapter, we're going to go and kind of give the chronology of what was going on in the northern kingdom. So we're not just reading a straight chronology through these. And so it's very easy to get lost. And it says, and Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might not suffer any to go out or to come in to Asa, king of Judah. And so remember, Asa, one of the things that it noted that he did, he had restored the treasures of the house of God, the things of the temple. But now he's about to lose them again. Verse 18, then Asa took all the silver and gold that were left in the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and delivered them into the hand of his servants. And King Asa sent them to Ben-Hadad, the son of Tabrimon, the son of Hezion, king of Syria, that dwelt at Damascus, saying, there is a league between me and thee, and between my father and thy father. Behold, I have sent unto thee a present of silver and gold. Come and break thy league with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may depart from me. So Ben-Hadad hearkened unto King Asa, and sent the captains of the hosts which he had against the cities of Israel, and smote Ijon and Dan and Abel, Beth-Maacah, and all Chinneroth, and all the land of Naphtali. And it came to pass when Baasha heard thereof, that he left off building of Ramah, and dwelt in Tirzah. Then King Asa made a proclamation throughout all Judah, none was exempted, and they took away the stones of Ramah, and the timber thereof, wherewith Baasha had builded, and King Asa built with them Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. Now, I don't believe this was a good way to handle the situation. I think what Asa did here was wrong. Because he took the Lord's treasure and he made a deal with the enemy of theirs to get them to turn on Israel. He's like basically bribed them to break the league that he had with them. That just shows you're not dealing with somebody of great character. And you don't take the Lord's treasures and give them to the king of Syria. Now, what's interesting about this, later on in the future, when King Ahaz comes on the scene, we're going to see he does the exact same thing, but he does it with the king of Assyria, because Syria, the one that they're working with now against Israel, later on, that same Syria is going to be working with Israel. Ahaz needs help in the southern kingdom to defeat the northern kingdom, so he goes and does the same thing with the treasures of the Lord, gives them to the king of Assyria, so they can go fight with Syria and kind of balance things out. And listen, they weren't supposed to mess with these heathen nations like that. You know what they were supposed to do when these battles came? They were supposed to call on the Lord. They should have gone to the prophets. They should have called on the Lord, and they would win battles. When they would call on the Lord, they were always winning battles. We're going to see great stories of that. In fact, Abijah experienced that when he called on the Lord. He saw a great victory. Even Asa's wicked father, when he called on the Lord, God delivered him, and God gave him great victory. But Asa, while he was a good guy and his heart was right, he wasn't real good at seeking the Lord like he should have. He didn't keep God in his thoughts like he should have. So it says, now the rest of the acts of Asa, and all his might and all that he did in the cities which he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? Nevertheless, in the time of his old age, he was diseased in his feet. And Asa slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, his father, and Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his stead. Now, in 2 Chronicles, again, 2 Chronicles always has more details. In 16 verse 12, it says, and Asa in the 39th year of his reign was diseased in his feet until his disease was exceeding great. Yet in his disease he sought not to the Lord, but to the physicians. And Asa slept with his fathers and died in the 41st year of his reign. Now, I just want to point this out because, one, this passage is not a call for Christians to never use doctors. Okay, please don't ever use the scripture in that way. Okay, listen, God wanted these kings seeking the Lord, using the prophets. Asa just didn't seem to care. Okay? It was not even wrong back then for them to have doctors, but the fact that when things were getting tough, he just wasn't turning to the Lord for these things. He's just kind of trusting in man's things, man's wisdom. That's not good. And God was not pleased with that. And he ended up dying as a result. If he would have sought the Lord in that, I believe God would have healed him of it. And so, verse 25, now we're back in time. Okay, we're back in time because remember, in the last week we saw Jeroboam, we saw his first son die. We saw that child that was born. We saw his wife trying to fool the prophet Ahijah, and basically him saying, as soon as you cross the threshold of your house, your child will be dead. Thus begun the judgment on Jeroboam's house. They're all going to be wiped out. But it didn't happen in Jeroboam's day. Nadab, now his son, is the king. And it says, and Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah. And he reigned over Israel 2 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of his father, and in his sin, wherewith he made Israel to sin. And Baasha, the son of Ahijah, of the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and Baasha smote him at Gibeathon, which belonged to the Philistines, for Nadab and all Israel laid siege to Gibeathon. Even in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, did Baasha slay him, and reigned in his stead. So, notice we have the line of Jeroboam, again, facing judgment, being punished. And so first we had Jeroboam, who was from the tribe of Ephraim, over the kingdom. Now we have the tribe of Issachar, basically running things. And you don't usually hear much about the tribe of Issachar, but that's where Baasha was from. But notice verse 29, and it came to pass when he reigned, that he smote all the house of Jeroboam. He left not to Jeroboam any that breathed, until he had destroyed him, according unto the saying of the Lord, which he spake by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite, because of the sins of Jeroboam which he sinned, and which he made Israel sin, by his provocation wherewith he provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger. Now the rest of the acts of Nadab and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. So finally we see this prophecy towards Jeroboam come to pass. He could have been preserved, but now his line is gone because of what he did. He got in self-preservation mode when he said, you know what, we can't let our people go to Jerusalem worshiping. That's going to make them want to follow him. He thought about himself. He made 2 golden calves, and you know what? He ended himself by doing that kind of thing. And understand, Baasha, him wiping out Jeroboam's line, was not him trying to fulfill the word of the Lord. It was him also trying to, basically keep himself, to preserve himself. Because he knows, hey, Jeroboam's been the king. Nadab is in that line of Jeroboam. If any of them are around, they might rally around him again. So that's that practice they would do. They would wipe everybody out. They would wipe out any potential rebellion. And so that's why it was kind of a dangerous thing being king. If you did not remain in power, your entire family was going to die. Your entire line was going to die. And we see that kind of thing a lot. Remember the story of Gideon. He had 70 sons, and he had one son by a concubine. Remember what that son did? He went and had all of his brothers and sisters killed. I mean, just a terrible thing. Why? So he could be the one in charge. And that was a very common thing that went on back then. And so, again, back during these times, it meant everything to these people to have their line go on forever. But we've just kind of lost our identity. We just don't care about that stuff anymore. And I don't know about you, but I do care about that. I really wanted to have boys, and I was really thankful when I had 2 boys. And I'm really anxious for there to be some grandsons. I was, when I was planning on going to Israel, I was a little nervous about taking Tommy before they were pregnant. They got pregnant, but it's still a girl. So it's like, I don't know if I want both of us going. We need to have Tommy McMurtry's continue going. And when there's, it said, that seems funny to all of you, but I've got more of an old school mindset. I want that line and that name to continue. And again, I love my daughters and they are precious, but I want that name to go on. They're going to take somebody else's name. My daughters are all going to dump me. I've been the main guy in their world for a long time, but y'all saw that dude that was here Sunday trying to steal my daughter's heart, and she's going to try to get her to take his name, bear up children to his name, not mine. So, so I don't think you got to treat boys. Your boys don't turn on you like that. It's the girls that do that. Boys don't change their names. The girls that do that. No stinking loyalty. And that's the way it's supposed to be. All right. I'm just being funny. That's the way it's supposed to be. They can't stay. They can't stay in my home forever. But I'm still going to claim those grandbabies. I'll still. But they're not. They're not going to have my name. And so these things matter. But in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, began Baasha, the son of Ahijah, to reign over all Israel in Tirzah 24 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sin, wherewith he made Israel to sin. And so even though Baasha is from another tribe, notice he just did the same thing that the previous kings did. And this is common too with our presidents. Even when the presidency changes parties, we always see, they're always complaining about the government getting too big on one side, the Democrats getting too much power. But then when the Republican comes in, does he ever give up any power? No, he just takes power in other areas. The Democrats all whine and complain about it. But when another Democrat comes in, does he get rid of any of the power that the Republican gained during that time? No, they just keep getting more and more powerful. Rather than undoing what the previous administration did, no, they typically just double down on it. And it's the same thing, because you know what? Jeroboam set a horrible precedent during his reign. And so now if Baasha comes along, and if he starts doing the right thing, he starts leading towards righteousness and towards the Lord, you know what he's going to have in his kingdom? He's going to have a big fight. He's going to have division. And as a result of that, he's probably going to lose his spot. And so it is. It's all about self-preservation. That's all they care about. That's all our politicians care about. You know what our politicians care about? Staying in power. That's what they care about. Staying in power, that's all that matters. And that's all that mattered to these kings. And so, to sum up what we've seen in this chapter that covers many years, just understand it's a reminder of the consequences of sin. Israel and Judah were not following the Lord. And when we see them split, a couple chapters before, it's like, oh, that's fine. Israel can go do good. Judah can go do good. They can all just go do their own thing. But no, now they're fighting with each other. Now they're having all these battles, setting themselves back. And the reality is, this was judgment on these nations. Sin caused death and destruction. It always does. All they need to do, all Israel's got to do is obey God, and everything's great. But obeying God is very difficult for sinful man. And Israel and Judah were no different. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel and Judah were no different than any other nation. They were sinners. And that is why every nation needs that blessing of Abraham, which is not Jews. These are all Jews fighting right now. It's Jesus. Jesus is the blessing. And so let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for your word. Help us to apply these principles and lessons that we learn from these stories. And Lord, help us to think about the future. Help us to understand the cost of disobedience. Help us to consider these things when we're tempted to give in to our flesh. And help us to trust you and learn from the mistakes of these kings. In your name we pray. Amen.